"I can't live without a man," said the giant widow. "The rancher let her stay all night. Westromance." The wind howled across the wide, empty fields, carrying with it the smell of rain and wet earth. On the old ranch, everything seemed alive in its own quiet way. The creaking of the wooden fence, the low calls of the cattle, and the soft rustle of the tall grass. The rancher moved quickly, his boots making firm prints in the mud as he checked on the animals. He had been up since before dawn, and even with years of experience, he never grew used to the unpredictability of the land. Out here in the middle of nowhere, life demanded attention. Every day was a challenge, every storm a test. That evening the sky darkened faster than usual. Badad Mika. Thick clouds rolled in, heavy and gray, blotting out the last hints of sunlight. The wind picked up, rattling the windows of the small ranch house. Inside, the fire flickered nervously, casting warm shadows across the room. The rancher, a broad-shouldered man with hands hardened by years of labor, paused for a moment to listen. The storm wasn't typical for this time of year, and something about it felt urgent, almost as if the weather itself was trying to warn him. He shook his head and went back to his chores, moving with steady determination. It was then that he noticed something unusual. A figure appeared on the muddy path leading up to the ranch. At first, he thought it might be a neighbor caught in the storm, but as the person drew closer, he realized it was a woman, a very tall woman, almost towering over him even from a distance. Her clothes were soaked, clinging to her frame, and her hair, dark and heavy, was plastered to her face and neck. She carried herself with strength, yet her shoulders seemed weighed down by something invisible. She looked tired, vulnerable, and desperate all at once. The rancher stepped outside, his boots sinking slightly into the mud. The rain had begun in earnest now, drumming heavily on the roof and turning the fields into a sea of shimmering water. He raised a hand to call out, but the woman had already spotted him. Her eyes, wide and earnest, met his, and he noticed a mix of fear and determination in them. She spoke, her voice strong but trembling. "Please, I don't know where else to go. Can I stay for just tonight?" She was unlike anyone he had seen before, her presence commanding, her size impressive, yet there was a softness to her gaze that tugged at something inside him. He wanted to ask questions, to understand why she was here, but the urgency in her voice and the storm raging around them made hesitation feel cruel. He nodded once, a firm gesture. "Come inside. Quickly. You'll catch your death out here." Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and leather, warm and familiar. The widow, though he didn't yet know her story, shivered as she stepped over the threshold. The rancher moved to the fire, stoking it so that it blazed brighter, and grabbed a thick blanket from the chair nearby. He handed it to her, and she wrapped it around her shoulders, like a shield, grateful for the small act of kindness. She looked around the room with wide eyes, taking in the simple furnishings, the photographs of cattle in past harvest on the walls, and the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from every corner. I can't stay out in the storm," she said softly, almost to herself. I can't live without a man right now. I need someone. I need..." Her voice broke and she trailed off, staring into the fire as if searching for the courage to finish her thought. The rancher didn't respond immediately. He had heard many things in his life. Complaints, requests, arguments, but never words quite like these. There was no shame in her confession, only a raw, honest vulnerability that made the room feel smaller and warmer at the same time. He found himself wanting to say something reassuring, to tell her it would be all right, though he didn't yet know what that meant. He simply nodded, setting the blanket more securely around her shoulders. "You're safe here," he said quietly. They sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the storm hammer against the windows. The widow's breathing gradually steadied, and she let herself relax a little, feeling the tension in her muscles ease. She looked up at the rancher, her expression both grateful and curious. Why would you let me stay?" "You don't even know me." He shrugged, trying to make it seem casual, though he felt the weight of the moment. "Because out here, people need help sometimes." "And tonight, you needed it. That's enough reason for me." There was no judgment in his voice, no expectation, just a simple acknowledgement of her humanity, and that small, simple statement seemed to reach her in a way few others could. As the night deepened, the widow began to tell her story, hesitating at first, then slowly gaining confidence. She spoke of her late husband, a man she had loved deeply, and the life they had built together. Rasp. Her voice softened with memories, sometimes breaking with emotion, but always returning to the present moment, to the storm outside and the quiet safety of the ranch. Brett. She spoke of loneliness, of the weight of loss, of nights spent wondering if she would ever feel safe and loved again. The rancher listened, mostly in silence, occasionally offering a small word of understanding or a nod. He was a man of few words, but he knew that sometimes listening was more powerful than speaking. He could see the strength she carried, despite her grief, the way she stood tall, even when she trembled, the way her hands were steady and capable, even when her heart was aching. She was a force of nature, like the storm outside, and yet she had allowed herself to be vulnerable in his home. That trust was something he would never take lightly. The fire crackled, throwing golden light across the room, and the sound of rain filled the spaces between their words. They moved closer to the warmth, the widow instinctively sitting near the fire, her eyes reflecting both the flames and her own inner turmoil. The rancher moved about the room, doing small chores, stoking the fire, fetching dry towels, checking the windows, yet always keeping an eye on her, as if ensuring she remained comfortable and safe. At one point, a sudden gust of wind slammed against the door, rattling the frame and causing a window pane to shake. The widow jumped, and without thinking, the rancher reached out and steadied her, his hand firm and reassuring. For a moment they locked eyes, and there was an unspoken understanding, a recognition of each other's presence, each other's need, and the fragile trust being built between them. Hours passed, and the storm outside began to lessen, though the rain still fell steadily. The widow grew quiet, watching the fire, her thoughts wandering to the life she had lost and the uncertain path ahead. The rancher remained nearby, a silent guardian, giving her the space to process her emotions without pressure or intrusion. There was a rhythm to the night, a quiet intimacy born not of words or gestures, but of mutual understanding and shared humanity. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't know if I can be someone's companion again. But tonight, I needed to feel safe. And I am. Thank you." The rancher nodded once, acknowledging her words without making promises he couldn't keep. "You're welcome," he said simply. Breath. Tonight, that's all that matters. Outside, the storm began to fade completely, leaving a soft drizzle in its place. The wind calmed, the cattle settled in their pens, and the ranch house seemed to exhale along with its inhabitants. Inside, the widow wrapped herself more securely in the blanket, feeling a warmth that went beyond the fire. She had come seeking shelter from the storm, but what she found was something deeper, a quiet understanding, a safe place, and a moment of connection she hadn't felt in years. The rancher, for his part, remained watchful. He was a man who had lived through hardship and solitude, and yet he felt a strange sense of calm that night. He didn't know what the future held. He had no idea if this woman would stay, or if the bond formed tonight would endure. But he knew one thing with certainty. He had offered shelter, and in doing so, had opened the door to something neither of them could have anticipated. As the night wore on, the fire burned low. The widow drifted into a restless sleep, and the rancher settled into his chair, keeping a quiet vigil. The wind outside whispered through the trees, carrying with it a sense of promise, as if the land itself approved of the unlikely companionship that had begun on that stormy night. It was a beginning, a fragile, tentative start of something new. And for both of them, it was enough.
Morning light seeped softly through the small windows of the ranch house.
The rain had stopped overnight, leaving the world outside fresh, wet, and sparkling. Puddles reflected the pale light of dawn, and the smell of wet earth mixed with the lingering smoke from last night's fire. The widow stirred beneath the thick blanket, her body still tired from the storm and the long night. She had slept more than she had in weeks, perhaps months, and yet there was a heaviness in her heart that she could not shake. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, and glanced around the room. The rancher was already up. He moved with a quiet efficiency, tending to the fire and preparing breakfast over a small stove. His presence was steady, unhurried, like the land itself, strong, reliable, and comforting in a way she had almost forgotten existed. The sight of him working, focused and calm, brought a strange warmth to her chest. She wanted to speak, to thank him again, but found herself hesitating, unsure of what words could capture her gratitude. Finally she rose and padded over to the kitchen area.
The floorboards creaked softly under her weight. "Good morning," she said, her voice still husky from sleep.
The rancher glanced up, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Morning," he replied simply, returning to the fire. "Coffee? Yes, please," she said, settling on a chair near the table. She watched him as he poured hot water over the grounds, the aroma filling the room. It was a simple ritual, yet in its simplicity there was comfort. They did not speak much at first, letting the quiet of the morning and the gentle warmth of the fire carry them. After a few minutes, she found herself speaking, almost as if compelled by the safe, calm space he had created. "I never expected anyone to help me like this," she admitted, her eyes fixed on the steaming cup in front of her. "People in town, they talk, and some of them think I'm weak or foolish or desperate. Maybe I am. I don't know." She paused, taking a careful sip of coffee. "But last night you didn't judge me. You just let me be." Psst. The rancher nodded, setting the coffee pot down.
"I don't judge people," he said quietly.
"I don't see the need. Everyone has a story." "Everyone has their battles. Last night you needed help. That's all that matters." His words were simple, but they struck a chord deep within her. She looked at him, really looked, noticing the way the morning light caught the lines of his face, the quiet strength in his hands, the patience in his movements. Breath. For a moment she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to stay here, not just for a night, but longer, to find some stability, some peace. Breakfast passed in a comfortable silence. She helped with small tasks, drying dishes and sweeping the floor while he tended to the animals outside. Her hands were capable, strong from years of hard work, and she could see that he noticed. There was a quiet respect in his eyes, an acknowledgement that she was not helpless despite her words the night before. After breakfast, they stepped outside together. The storm had left the fields glistening, the grass heavy with raindrops. The widow took a deep breath, letting the fresh, earthy air fill her lungs. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of possibility, a fragile, tentative hope that life could still hold moments of safety and comfort. The rancher guided her around the property, showing her the livestock in the barns, explaining how he managed the land. She listened attentively, asking questions, learning quickly. She realized that she could handle herself here, that her strength and knowledge were valuable, and that she was not entirely alone in the world. Yeah. As they worked, small moments of connection began to form. She would laugh quietly at his dry humor, and he would glance at her with a subtle smile. There was a rhythm to their interactions, a give and take that felt natural and easy. She began to see him not just as a protector, but as someone who could be a companion, someone who could understand the quiet parts of her life. By midday, the sun had broken through the clouds, casting warm light over the fields. Bray. They paused near the barn, leaning on the wooden railing, watching the cattle move slowly across the wet grass. She felt a sense of peace, yet beneath it, a current of tension and longing she did not fully understand. Bray. She had come here seeking shelter from the storm, but what she found was more complex. A man who offered safety without expectation, and in that an unfamiliar vulnerability stirred within her. "I don't usually talk this much," she said softly, almost to herself. "I tend to keep things inside." He looked at her, his expression open, patient. "Sometimes it helps to speak, Bray. Sometimes it helps to let someone else in." She nodded, appreciating the simplicity of his advice. There was no pressure, no demand for intimacy or immediate understanding, just a quiet offer of support. She realized how starved she had been for this kind of connection, and the realization made her chest ache with both hope and fear. As the afternoon wore on, the widow helped him with chores around the ranch, feeding the animals, repairing fences, and organizing supplies. Each task was physical, grounding, and allowed them to work together without the need for many words. There was comfort in the routine, in the tangible progress of their labor, and in the small shared victories of the day. During a break, they sat on the porch drinking water and watching the sun continue its slow climb. The widow glanced at him, noticing the quiet way he observed the land, the way he moved with confidence and care. She felt a mixture of admiration and something deeper, a desire to be near him, to share in the quiet rhythms of this life he had built. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" she asked tentatively, not wanting to intrude, but needing to understand him. He considered the question for a moment, looking out over the fields. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I've learned to be okay with it. The land keeps you busy, keeps you grounded. And people come and go. You get used to taking care of yourself." She nodded, understanding more than he realized. "I used to think I could do everything on my own," she said. "I still try sometimes. But last night, I realized I can't. I don't want to. Not anymore." His gaze softened, and for a moment the distance between them seemed smaller, bridged by shared understanding and quiet acknowledgement. She did not need him to say more, and he did not need her to explain further. The unspoken connection was enough. Fragile, tentative, but real. Later, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they returned inside. She prepared a simple meal, while he checked the animals one last time. The evening light filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow across the room. She felt a strange mixture of relief and nervous anticipation. Breath. She had found shelter, yes, but she had also found something else, a possibility she had not allowed herself to imagine in years. They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the clinking of utensils and the occasional crackle from the fire. Afterward, they sat together, listening to the night settle over the ranch. The widow spoke more freely now. sharing memories of her past, her late husband, and the challenges she had faced. Each story revealed layers of strength and resilience, but also the deep loneliness she had carried. The rancher listened, offering small words of comfort when needed, never pressing, never judging. Night fell, and the stars began to appear in the clear sky above. She wrapped herself in a blanket, feeling the warmth of the fire and the quiet presence of the man nearby. She did not need to speak. They were both content in the shared silence, a comfort that was rare and precious. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft and thoughtful. "I don't know what the future holds," she said. "I don't know if I can ever trust someone again, but tonight, I feel like I can try." The rancher nodded, his expression calm and steady. "Tomorrow is another day," he said. "We'll see where it takes us. For now, just rest. You're safe." She leaned back, closing her eyes, letting herself absorb the quiet, the warmth, and the sense of safety that had been missing from her life for so long. Outside, the wind whispered gently through the trees, and the ranch, strong and enduring, seemed to welcome her as one of its own. For the first time in many weeks, maybe even months, she felt a sense of hope stirring deep within her chest. The night stretched on peacefully, the fire burning low, the rain long gone, leaving behind only the memory of a storm and the promise of something new. The widow drifted into a gentle sleep, comforted by the knowledge that she was not alone. And the rancher, watching over her quietly, felt a rare sense of peace as well, an understanding that sometimes helping someone else could bring its own quiet reward, and that the beginnings of trust and companionship could take root in the most unexpected of nights. The sun rose slowly over the ranch, painting the fields in soft shades of gold. The widow woke to the smell of breakfast being prepared, the warmth of the fire still lingering in the room. She stretched, feeling the stiffness in her muscles from yesterday's chores, and watched the rancher move about with his usual quiet efficiency. There was a rhythm to his actions, steady and comforting, and she found herself feeling lighter simply by watching him. She dressed quickly, pulling on clothes that had dried overnight by the fire. The air outside was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of the wet grass and the distant mountains. She stepped onto the porch, taking in the familiar sights of the ranch, the fences lined with morning dew, the cattle slowly moving across the fields, and the old barn standing proud against the horizon. It was a peaceful scene, yet she felt a flutter of uncertainty. The rancher looked up from where he was tending the horses. "Morning," he called, his voice calm and warm. "Morning," she replied, smiling softly. There was a pause as they both looked at the fields, the silence between them comfortable. It wasn't forced or awkward. It was natural, like the space between two people who had begun to trust each other. He handed her a small cup of coffee, and she accepted it gratefully.
"I wanted to thank you for yesterday," she said quietly, "for letting me stay for—"
"Everything." He shrugged lightly, as if it were no big deal. "You needed a safe place," he said simply. "That's reason enough." No thanks needed, but she could feel there was more between them than just words. There was a sense of mutual respect and understanding that neither had spoken about, but both had felt. They moved outside to check on the animals. The widow helped him carry feed, her arms strong and steady. She watched him closely as he worked, noticing the care he took with each animal, the way he handled the horses with gentle authority. She felt a growing admiration for him, mixed with a quiet warmth she couldn't quite name, perhaps.
As they walked through the fields, she finally spoke again. I've been afraid of trusting anyone since my husband passed."
"I didn't think I could ever rely on someone again." He glanced at her, a soft look in his eyes. Breath. "It's not easy," he said. "I understand that. Psst. Trust isn't something you give lightly. It's earned. And sometimes it takes time." She looked down at her hands, feeling the weight of her own fears and doubts. "I'm willing to try," she admitted, "even if it's just a little at a time." He nodded, and for a moment, neither spoke. They continued their work, the rhythm of feeding the animals and checking fences giving them both a sense of purpose. The widow realized how much she had missed the simple acts of daily life, the satisfaction of physical work, and the comfort of shared labor. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt real and grounding. Later, they paused near the barn, taking a break. The widow leaned against the railing, watching the sun glint off the wet grass. She felt a mixture of hope and fear. She had come to the ranch for shelter from a storm, but now she wondered if this place could become something more. A home, a refuge, maybe even a future. The rancher joined her at the railing.
"You've got a good head for this," he said, nodding toward the barn and the animals.
You know how to handle things." She smiled softly, feeling a sense of pride.
"I've had to learn," she replied.
But
They shared a quiet laugh, the sound blending with the gentle rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. It was a small moment, but it felt significant, a bond forming through shared understanding and mutual respect.
after a while they returned inside. The widow began preparing lunch, chopping vegetables and setting the table. The rancher watched her, appreciating the care she put into each task. He had lived a life of independence, and yet her presence brought a new sense of warmth to the house, a sense that the home was not just a place to survive, but a place to live. Narration. As they ate, they talked more freely about their pasts. The widow shared stories of her late husband, the life they had built together, and the struggles she had faced alone since his passing. The rancher listened attentively, offering small words of comfort when she faltered, never judging, never interrupting.
"I've been lonely for a long time," she admitted quietly.
Breaths. "I thought I could manage, but sometimes the loneliness is too heavy. I didn't realize how much until last night." He nodded, understanding more than she expected. Breath. "I know the feeling," he said. "Out here, you get used to being alone. But it doesn't make it easier. It just becomes part of life." She looked at him, seeing the honesty in his expression, restraint in him, but also a vulnerability that he rarely showed to anyone. It made her feel closer to him, knowing that he too had faced loneliness and hardship. After lunch, they decided to work on the fence that had been damaged during the storm. The task was tiring, but it allowed them to work side by side, moving in harmony with each other. There were moments of light teasing and laughter, small gestures that made the work feel lighter. The widow felt a growing connection, a sense that she could trust him not just with her safety, but with her heart. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the fields, they finished their work and stepped back to admire their efforts. The fence was repaired, the animals secure, and the ranch once again orderly. The widow felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a deeper appreciation for the rancher who had welcomed her into his life so naturally. They returned to the house, where the widow began preparing dinner. The rancher tended to the fire, keeping it warm and steady.
As they worked, she felt a quiet tension, a mix of anticipation and nervousness.
She wanted to ask him to stay with her, to share more time together, but she feared imposing on his life. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but firm.
"I don't want to leave," she admitted. "I feel safe here."
"I feel like I belong, at least for now." He paused, looking at her with a mixture of surprise and understanding. "Psst, you're welcome to stay," he said. "There's room here."
You don't have to go anywhere if you don't want to. Relief washed over her, and she smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders.
For the first time in months, she felt a sense of belonging, a feeling that she had been missing for far too long. As night fell, they sat together by the fire, drinking tea and talking quietly. The widow shared more about her life, her dreams, and her fears. The rancher listened, offering encouragement and support. There was no pressure, no expectation, just a simple, honest connection between two people who had found comfort in each other's presence.
At one point, a sudden noise outside startled them both.
Psst. A branch had fallen in the yard, breaking the stillness of the night. The widow jumped slightly, and the rancher reached out, steadying her hand in his. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world outside the ranch seemed to disappear. All that mattered was the quiet bond they had formed, the trust they had built, and the understanding that they were not alone. They spent the rest of the evening in comfortable silence, listening to the wind rustle through the trees and the distant call of an owl. The widow felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years, a feeling that perhaps life could still hold moments of happiness and connection. Before going to bed, she looked at the rancher, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything, for letting me stay, for listening, for being here." He nodded, a small smile on his face. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "I'm glad you're here. That's enough." She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sense of safety and belonging that she had not felt since her husband's passing. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that there would be challenges and moments of doubt. But for now, she allowed herself to rest in the comfort of the rancher's presence, knowing that she was not alone. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought about the day they had shared, the work they had done, and the bond that was slowly growing between them. It was a beginning, a small, tentative start of something meaningful, and for the first time in a long time she felt a sense of hope, a feeling that perhaps she could trust again, and that life could hold more than just loneliness and loss. The rancher remained nearby, keeping a quiet watch as the night settled over the ranch. He thought about the widow, her strength, her vulnerability, and the way she had touched his life in just a short time. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he wanted her to stay, that he wanted to see where this connection could go. Outside, the stars twinkled in the clear sky, and the ranch lay calm and peaceful, a place where two lonely hearts had begun to find solace in each other. The storm was gone, but its memory lingered, reminding them both of the fragility of life and the importance of trust, kindness, and companionship. And as the widow slept, wrapped in the blanket by the fire, and the rancher sat quietly nearby, both knew that this was more than just shelter from a storm. It was the start of a bond that could weather any challenge, a connection built on honesty, respect, and the quiet strength of two people who had found each other when they needed it most. Morning came quietly over the ranch, the first light of day spilling over the fields and painting everything in soft gold. The widow stirred in the guest cabin the rancher had prepared for her the night before. The cabin was small but comfortable, with a sturdy wooden floor, a simple bed, and a window that looked out over the dew-covered pastures. She stretched and took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air fill her lungs. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. She didn't have all the answers about her future, but she had a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. The rancher had been up early, tending to the livestock as usual. She could see him moving with steady, calm precision across the fields, checking the fences and feeding the animals. There was something reassuring about his presence, a quiet strength that made her feel safer than she had in months. She watched him for a moment, noting the way he moved, the way he spoke softly to the horses, and the patience in his eyes as he worked. She stepped out of the cabin and walked toward the main house, careful to avoid the wet grass. The rancher noticed her and gave a small nod, his eyes lighting up with a quiet warmth. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied, her voice soft. She paused for a moment, gathering her courage. I think I'm ready to stay here. Not just for a night, not just until the storm passes, but for longer. I want to be part of this place, part of your life, if you'll have me." The rancher studied her for a moment, his expression calm but thoughtful. "I'd like that," he said finally. "I want you here, not because I need someone, but because I see how strong and capable you are, and I know you belong here." Relief and warmth spread through her chest. She smiled, feeling the bond between them grow stronger. It wasn't just about needing shelter or comfort anymore. This was about two people finding companionship, trust, and respect in each other. The day began with shared work on the ranch. The widow helped with feeding the animals, mending fences, and organizing supplies. Each task was a chance for her to show her skills and independence, and the rancher noticed every detail, admiring her strength and determination. There was no pressure between them, no expectation, just two people working side by side, slowly building a life together. By mid-morning, the sun had fully risen, casting a warm glow over the fields. The widow paused for a moment, looking out at the wide-open spaces and the mountains in the distance. She felt a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced since her husband passed. Here, she could work, learn, and live without fear of judgment or criticism.
Here. She could simply be herself. The rancher approached, carrying a small basket of freshly gathered eggs.
He handed it to her with a gentle smile. "You're getting the hang of this faster than I thought," he said. She laughed softly, feeling the joy of the moment. "I've had practice," she replied. "Bree, just not in such peaceful surroundings."
They worked through the afternoon, the widow feeling increasingly at home on the ranch.
She began to take pride in the small routines and accomplishments, from feeding the animals to fixing broken tools, realizing that these tasks gave her a sense of purpose. The rancher, in turn, found himself appreciating her company more than he had expected. Her presence brought a warmth and liveliness to the ranch, something he hadn't realized he had been missing. As the day wore on, the widow suggested they take a short break. They walked to the edge of the fields, sitting together on a fallen log, watching the cattle graze in the golden light. There was a gentle silence between them, comfortable and unforced. She felt safe here, not just in her surroundings, but in the company of this man who had welcomed her without judgment. "Never thought I'd feel this way again," she admitted softly.
I thought life after my husband would be nothing but loneliness and work, but being here with you, it feels different.
Like I can actually breathe. "I feel the same," he said. "I've been alone for a long time, but you make this place feel alive."
You make it feel like home. Her heart swelled at his words.
She had feared opening herself to someone again, worried about losing her independence or facing disappointment. But here, with him, there was no fear, only trust and understanding. Desperate Everth. Evening approached, and the two returned to the house to prepare dinner. They worked side by side, chopping vegetables, stirring stews, and setting the table. The widow felt a deep satisfaction in the shared labor, in the rhythm of their movements and the ease of their companionship. It was a simple life, but it was rich with meaning, connection, and comfort. After dinner, they sat on the porch together, the sky ablaze with the colors of sunset. The widow leaned back, feeling the cool breeze on her face and the warmth of the rancher's presence beside her. There was a sense of peace here, a feeling that they had both found something rare. A safe place, a companion, and the quiet beginnings of love.
"I never expected to find this," she said softly, her eyes on the horizon.
A place to belong, someone to trust, someone who sees me as I am. Den.
He glanced at her, a small, sincere smile on his face. "You deserve it," he said.
You've been through so much, and yet you're still strong, still willing to move forward. I admire that. They watched the sky together as the stars began to appear, twinkling in the clear night. The widow felt a deep sense of gratitude and hope. She had come to the ranch seeking shelter from a storm, and she had found so much more. A home, a purpose, and a connection that was slowly growing into something lasting. The rancher spoke softly, breaking the comfortable silence. I want you to know.
You don't have to decide everything at once. This is just the beginning.
We'll take it one day at a time. She nodded, appreciating his patience and understanding.
"I like that," she said. "One day at a time."
That feels right. As the night deepened, they returned inside. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm shadows across the room. The widow settled in a chair near the fire, and the rancher joined her, keeping a quiet, watchful presence. They spoke little, letting the comfort of each other's company fill the space. There was no need for grand gestures or declarations. The simple act of being together, safe and understood, was enough. Later, she prepared to retire for the night. The rancher handed her a blanket for extra warmth, and she wrapped it around herself with a grateful smile.
Thank you.
She said quietly. For what? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. For being here. For everything, she replied, her voice soft and sincere. He nodded, a warm look in his eyes. You're welcome, he said. I'm glad you're here. That night she slept peacefully in the cabin, feeling secure in a way she hadn't in a long time. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the storm that had forced her to seek shelter, to the moments of trust and understanding they had shared, to the slowly growing bond that now gave her hope. Stations. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she was not alone, where life could be shared and where she could find happiness again. The rancher stayed up a little longer, keeping a quiet watch over the property and thinking about the woman who had walked into his life so unexpectedly. He considered the loneliness he had felt for so long, the routine of the ranch, and the quiet yearning for companionship he had buried deep within. Something alive, and he knew that he wanted her to stay, not just tonight, not just tomorrow, but for the long term. Days turned into weeks, and the widow gradually became part of the rhythm of ranch life. She tended the animals with skill and care, repaired fences, helped with chores, and even learned some of the rancher's tricks for handling the land. They worked together seamlessly, sharing labor, laughter, and quiet moments of understanding. The bond between them grew stronger, built on trust, respect, and the simple joys of everyday life.
The widow began to feel fully at home.
She had discovered her strength, independence, and resilience, yet she had also learned to accept help, companionship, and love without fear. Breath. The rancher had shown her that trust and connection were possible, even after loss, and that life could hold moments of joy, warmth, and shared purpose. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant hues of orange and pink, they sat on the porch together watching the cattle settle for the night. The widow leaned slightly against him, feeling the quiet strength of his presence. Breath. I think I could stay here forever, she said softly, her voice filled with contentment. He smiled, placing a gentle hand over hers. And I'd like that, he said. "I've come to care for you more than I realized. You've become part of this place, part of my life. Best."
"And I hope you'll stay."
She looked up at him, her heart full. "I will," she said, her voice steady. "I want to be here with you on this ranch." Together, the stars appeared above them, twinkling in the clear night sky. The ranch lay quiet and peaceful, a place where two lonely hearts had found each other, and where the storm that had brought them together had transformed into hope, trust, and the beginning of a new life. They remained on the porch for a long time, speaking little, simply enjoying the comfort of each other's presence. It was a quiet, unspoken promise of companionship, understanding, and love, a bond that would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. And as the night settled fully over the ranch, the widow knew with certainty that she had found a home, a partner, and a place where she truly belonged. The rancher, too, felt the same, understanding that in opening his home and heart, he had gained not just a companion, but someone who made life richer, fuller, and brighter. The wind whispered softly through the trees. The cattle rested peacefully, and the fire burned low in the hearth. In the quiet of the ranch, two hearts had found each other, and for the first time in years, both knew that the future held promise, love, and the simple joy of being together.